Hello. Hi, everyone. We are ready to begin, and it's lovely to see this packed house. I'm Niharika Acharya, Executive Director of Events at The Hill, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to Mayors Matter, Deepening the Generational Compact in Communities. As America ages and becomes more diverse, generational inclusion is rising to the top of many a to-do list. We're looking forward to hearing from some of the most respected mayors from across the country today on how they're working to build healthy communities that include people of all ages. Not far from us, an event of historical significance is unfolding. We are glad you chose our event instead. We will not disappoint. I'd like to begin by thanking our underwriter, AARP, for making this afternoon's conversation possible. Americans are aging, and fast. According to the most recent census data, people over the age of 60 number more than 70 million. Over the next decade or so, older Americans are projected to outnumber those under the age of 18. So let that sink in a bit. These older adults are poised to work and live longer than previous generations. So it should come as no surprise that they are continuing to engage in their communities far longer than their parents' generation. Local leaders are recognizing that cities need to ensure both infrastructure and services are prepared to support this active, diverse group. In a few moments, we're going to hear from America's mayors about what they're doing to acknowledge the important role this demographic plays in the continued success of communities all across the country. First, a few quick housekeeping notes. In addition to our audience here in the room, we are also live streaming on thehill.com. Please keep your phones on silent throughout the duration of the program, but we encourage you to engage in the conversation on social media. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at The Hill Events, and join the conversation using the hashtag #TheHillMayors. We are going to be taking questions during the program, so please be on the lookout for members of our team with handheld mics. Finally, you will receive an electronic survey following the conclusion of today's event. We are always eager to hear how we can make our programs more dynamic, so I encourage you to take a few moments to provide your feedback. And now, let's dive right in. For the first conversation of this program, I am so pleased to call on stage the mayors of some of the nation's largest cities, attractive destinations for Americans young and old. So please put your hands together for the mayor of Seattle, Washington, Jenny Durkan, Mayor Francis Suarez of Miami, Florida, and the mayor of Fort Worth, Texas, Betsy Price. Joining the mayors on stage is our own Steve Clemens, editor-at-large of The Hill. Steve, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Niharika. It's such a pleasure with all of you. We really thought many more of you would be at the impeachment thing. So glad you're here. There's food, there's it. But let's turn this into a fun conversation today. We've got an intimate enough room, a crowded room with great energy to have some encounters with people who are shaping our future and working in cities with the many, many different challenges. We're taking a slice of that today. I lost a battle. I mean, my team hates when I confess battles I've lost with them. But I guess we're calling this Mayors Matter. I really want to call this, does 50 plus matter? So you know, when we're talking today a little bit about intergenerational bond building, what we're really saying is, you know, are folks that are 50 plus, do they have a place in our society? Are they being squeezed out? Are they liabilities? Are they assets? And so, Mayor Durkan, let me start with you and ask you, how do you approach the future of Seattle and the hard choices you have with different communities, but also the 50-plus community?
Yeah, great question. So thanks all for being here, and I know that the other mayors will disagree with me, but Seattle really is the best city in America right now. And we have grown so quickly. In the last 4 to 5 years, we've grown by about 140,000 people. And most of that growth has happened without an increased growth for housing. We have cost of living has increased so significantly. A small one-bedroom apartment goes for about $1,700 a month. The median house is $750,000. So seniors on a fixed income are really getting squeezed in our market. If they own their house, they've seen their property taxes increase to the point where some people are paying more in property tax than they paid in their original mortgage on their house. And others who are in the rental market can't find a place to live. So we have to be super intentional about how do we make sure that we are creating a city that in the future really is diverse, that it has seniors aging in place, it has intergenerational families, that our communities of color have not been pushed out. And so we try to do it both at the high level and also at the very specific level. So if you look at all the challenges a city faces today, housing and transportation are two of the biggest, and those really affect our senior community. We want a city that mobility is easy, people can walk to where they need to get, that we have housing that is affordable near the places they want to live, and that they're in and around multiple generations.
What is not going as well in Seattle as much as you would like it to?
Look, we reflect the changing times in America. I think the shift in the economy has been transformational, and I think history will say that we are living in a time more transformational than the Industrial Revolution. And as that economy has shifted, so many people have been left behind. So we can highlight that very clearly. We have, there was an article recently in the national press that said that 5 cities in America have gotten 90% of the jobs created in the tech economy. Seattle's one of them. So those 5 cities in America, 90% of the jobs. With that has had this enormous influx of high-paying salaries, vitality, people from all over the world. But then there are those who are locked out. And the bridges to that economy have been shut. So we really have to be looking at how do we make Seattle more affordable for more people? How do we make sure that there's true economic opportunity, both for our youth coming up, but also for seniors and whatever their second and third acts are? So those are some of the things we're really working on.
Mayor Price, thank you so much, Mayor Durkin. Mayor Price, and you guys are all ready for this. Do you think Seattle is the best city in the United States?
No, of course not. Fort Worth is, and he would say it's Miami.
No, I had to set that up. But let me ask you a question we were just talking about. You know, I've spent some time with the mayor.
Once.
I've had some fun times with Mayor Price. Mayor Price, tell it as it is, which I know you will, on whether I'm intrigued on whether these communities, you know, millennials we hear a lot about, we hear about 50-plus community, or the elder community, we have different ways of framing that, on whether they are at each other's throats and there's a zero sum between their interests in a city, or whether there are ways to bring them together. And I know you're very direct about this, so what's the answer?
Yeah, we don't see that they're at each other's throat. Both generations, the millennials, the older seniors, of which I'm one, probably the oldest one up here, so we're all going to live a lot longer.
I have makeup on.
You look good, Steve. I do too, but I'm not sure it covered all those sins. But, you know, you have the Gen Xers in the middle, and everybody brings something special to the table. And everybody has their own needs at different points in their life, and there is so much to be learned from our senior members, and there's so much for them to learn from Gen Xers.
But they don't come packaged with that. I mean, that's the kumbaya answer. I mean, how do you actually create that interest and curiosity across lines? Because I know you do it.
Yeah, we do. You have to get out and get them engaged, and you have to engage people at each end and give them a chance to interact, whether it's at your community center, whether it's at the YMCA and Silver Sneakers and the Young Early Learning Alliance. We have an Early Learning Alliance, and part of our benefit with our Early Learning Alliance, and this is children cradle to kindergarten, is 50% of the volunteers helping with them are seniors. It's a good chance to interact. We have Read Fort Worth, which is our literacy program. 60% of our volunteers in Read Fort Worth are seniors working with high school, elementary, and middle school kids. I think communication is the key. We do, as we talked about earlier, engagement has been one of the hallmarks of my administration for 9 years, and we've done everything. And I'm a cyclist. I'll admit I'm one of those crazy people that shows up in spandex and a helmet. But we do rolling town halls on bicycles in different parts of the community all over the city, and a large majority of our cyclists are seniors. But we also have kids, millennials, and Gen Xers. It's a great opportunity. If you're pedaling hard on a 105-degree day in the Texas heat, and you got somebody younger than you that's willing to reach out and give you a hand up, it's a great benefit and a great chance afterwards to have a cocktail with them and talk about
Francis has his town halls on surfboards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you got to do
Paddleboards.
caffeinated town halls, and you just have to really reach out and make a concerted effort to connect the groups.
So Francis, thank you so much. Francis, Mayor Suarez, you know, I have had the pleasure of talking to a number of the people who work for you. And it's interesting because they're, you know, oftentimes you meet people who work for mayors and they're, you know, kind of, you know, get really tight. It's tough. They don't have fingernails. They actually like you, and they're proud of the fact they have this line. They say, you know, our mayor created the earned income tax credit for housing, and so tell us about that, because I have heard this line 3 times today and previously, that there's a deal of civic pride that you're moving the needle on affordable housing.
Well, first of all, the NFL thinks that Miami objectively is the best city because the Super Bowl is going to be there in a couple weeks. But no, what we noticed and what we learned is that there's an affordable housing crisis, not only in the city, but certainly it's acute amongst our elderly. Our elderly are living on fixed incomes. Right. They're living on Social Security. And we did a deep dive to see what happens when they are even living in affordable housing units. There's this presumption that if they're in an affordable housing unit, they've won the lottery. They've made it, if you will. Because what elderly in this generation have to look forward to in retirement is work, right? So what we noticed in our statistics was that their rents were going up at twice the rate that their Social Security payments were going up. And what we realized is that meant that they had to make very, very tough choices. Choices that most of us in this room don't have to make, which is, do we pay for cable or do we disconnect our cable? Can we go and buy groceries? You know, are we going to be able to pay the electric bill at the end of the month? So we created a rental assistance program that is based on cost burden, and those that are significantly cost burden seniors in our community. It's the first of its kind, as far as I know, in the nation. And you know, what we're seeing is we have seniors that are paying 80–90% of their income in rent. And so you combine that with what you see in both of these cities, which is a significant amount of gentrification, which is putting a tremendous amount of pressure and pushing people out. And we've combined that with a climate gentrification home repair program. So we're trying to do everything that we can to keep people in their homes.
Climate gentrification, I mean, explain, I had no idea what that means.
So what we're seeing...
Do any of you know what that means? You got to get better at this. Yeah. So what is a climate gentrification?
It's a first of its kind, too, in the nation.
Good. Yeah?
You created it.
So, right, we created it. I created the term, too.
Yeah, I know.
You bit.
Right, you bit.
Yeah,
you got
exactly.
hooked.
So
what we're
tell
seeing,
me more.
Of course. So what we're seeing in the city of Miami is, or we're measuring the possibility of climate gentrification. In other words, because some of our wealthier communities are coastal communities, with sea level rise and other climatic phenomenon, there is the worry that people are going to start buying inland, where some of our poorer communities are and some of our elderly communities are. So what we did was we created a fund for those in those communities that can actually make their homes more resilient, whether it's putting a new roof or whether it's impact windows, things that are cost prohibitive for many elderly in our community because they cost $10,000 and $20,000. And the only proviso is it's a forgivable loan. So after 10 years, they don't have to pay it back, but they can't flip their home. They can't sell their home within that period of time. And so it prevents, it stems the tide of gentrification that we see happening in all of our cities, but it's being exacerbated in cities like Miami by the climate phenomenon.
We don't call it climate gentrification, but we do the same thing with CDBG, which is community block grant funds and city funds for home repairs in lower income areas, and seniors get priority on it. First piece goes if you have a homestead on your home and you're over 65, and if you're over 65 in Fort Worth, your property taxes are frozen. Your value can still go up, but the taxes themselves have a freeze on it to the dollar amount the year that you turn 65. And if you need home repairs, then you're first in line for those dollars there.
Probably just got a lot more people moving to
Come on to Fort Worth.
Mayor Durkin, you, I know, have also struggled with the housing issue, and I was intrigued that you're beginning to look at different communities like LGBTQ community and age communities there and kind of find housing solutions on those fronts. Can you give us some insight into what housing needles you're moving on income, and then is there, I mean, I'm really interested in Seattle because it's such an incredible place, you know, Starbucks and Amazon and Microsoft, vast wealth, and yet you're having to do these things. And so what's the misconnect between, you know, the Bezos crowd, who's also in town here now, but that crowd and trying to fill these market failures, if you will, for real people?
Yep, I think it is those splits that we're seeing, the schisms, that is, one, you've got the rise of the new economy, that requires a very specific type of background to get into it. You know, a lot of it computer and tech based. You have the old economy, which the wages have not kept up, and then you have the rise of the gig economy that doesn't have any of the employee protections.
Right.
And so we've been really focused on how do we look at each piece of those puzzles. And in housing, we saw that there are gaps in a number of areas. We have in some of our communities, particularly in the areas where we had a large African American population. When I was growing up in Seattle, it was over 70% African American. Today it's less than 14%. In our Chinatown International District, we're seeing really pressures there because it's close to the city. So how do we build housing for those communities? So we build projects in those communities and added a community preference. So for our low-income housing, as we build new things, we give the people from the community the first shot so that they can stay in community. We've also focused on some of the seniors. We have LGBTQ, and we saw there was no easy place for those to live, so we had our first city-financed low-income housing development for LGBTQ. And so really looking at where we can keep community in place and let them age in place has been a focus of ours, because you know, it is those seniors, which I am proud to get my senior discount everywhere I go. It is, you can see that there's such an asset to cities from their experience, from what they add to vitality, from their wisdom, but also whatever the second and third chapters are. But if they can't stay in a city, you lose that. And so you've got to make sure that you're having all your programs like the ones we're talking about here, and how do you bookend those with, you know, low reduced fares for transportation and buses and light rail? How do you make sure your utility bills and property taxes, that you have a combination of discounts? So one thing we did for the first time ever is we did a data dive and found that most of the people who were eligible for a reduced property taxes or utilities because of either their income or their age weren't using it. So we created a portal, affordability portal, working with our tech companies, helped us build it.
Right.
So there's one-stop shopping. You can go there, you can put your zip code, your income, and it tells you all the programs you're eligible for, and then gives you links to sign up for them. So part of it is just making sure people know where they can go to make it more affordable in Seattle for them.
You know, we just had another room, a side meeting over here, and we have Brian Barnett, the mayor of Rochester Hills, Michigan, who's president of the U.S. Mayors, and I guess we have 270 mayors who are going to be in Washington over the next couple of days.
Watch out.
In like a big, you know, it's like a big show and tell. I don't know if you're going to show
Washington.
Washington.
And they all think they're from the best city.
Yeah, they all think it's the best city. But you all have like little
none of us
things.
are
I mean,
running for
it's interesting because we have Congress here, we have the federal level, which isn't working, which is clearly paralyzed. I mean, that's a fact, it's paralyzed today. But I'm interested in the incubators that each of your cities represent and the show and tell you're about to go through, and whether you need this town or not, whether the resources that you have, the models you have among each other, does the federal government at some point just become irrelevant to the direction and the course you're setting, or do the resources that Washington provides, are they still important to you?
Yeah, the resources are still important because clearly every dollar up here is our money. It comes from you, either directly on your income tax or indirectly on other taxes. So the ability to be here for mayors to lobby, for council members to lobby, to how it gets sent back to us and how it's, you know, we would love to come and lobby that it comes with less strings, because every one of you would agree, mayors are where the rubber hits the road.
We are the rubber.
We are the rubber, yeah. But you can't go to church. You can't often say you can't go to the beauty shop or get your nails done. What somebody comes up and walks in and says, Mayor, you need to fix my street light, or you need to fix my pothole. And that it's got to be done. And when you dial 911, they expect a police or fire officer to show up and water. And so you have to come to Washington and lobby. And you hope that the people that are here are listening and that they will put less bureaucracy on us. And it matters because they send dollars back to us. Now, they don't and shouldn't shape our policy. Our policies on healthy communities, on transit, have to be shaped in our local community, but they can help facilitate the funds to come with that.
Mayor Suarez?
So we take an approach that we deal with our issues mostly in-house, and we don't rely on Washington or the state, for that matter. When we get help from the state or from the federal government, it's sort of like icing on the cake. But certainly, I think they really should be involved. I mean, like you know, as Betsy said, that we're paying these taxes as well, and there are major issues that require tremendous budgets. I mean, when we're talking about mass transit, you're talking about usually multi-$100 million solutions. When you're talking about any climate adaptation, you're talking about multi-$100 million solutions, if not billion-dollar solutions. So, you know, we certainly have resources, and our residents have done things that are unusual, like voting to tax themselves to solve some of these problems because they're so acute. But certainly it'd be great to have a matching component, and we're trying to get the federal government to see the wisdom of matching on housing, matching on transportation, and matching on resiliency, which are issues that a lot of major cities are grappling with.
And long term, it reduces the dollars that have to come from Washington
Absolutely.
when they match with our local dollars.
Absolutely.
Mary Durgan?
Yeah, I would echo this. I might say, you know, first, I think all mayors would agree the number one thing we want from the federal government is to stay out of our way, and not to impede us. And I do think that cities have become the laboratory for America. People used to say that about states, but I think it is the cities. I think we are piloting some of the most progressive programs everywhere from preschool to free college to you name it. But at some point, if they work, we want to scale them nationwide. The best part of the conferences for mayors is for us to talk to each other, to learn what's working, what's not working. That needs to be done at a federal level. Those resources need to be put to work for America, because America was not envisioned as a bunch of city-states. It was envisioned as this unified country. And so I think that the federal government needs to, in some ways, be a better partner to stand up and say, you know, if we see that this works, if the next generation of Americans know that we are going to be stronger as a nation, if kids have really good preschool and healthy meals, we're going to make sure that happens in every city in America.
Let me ask you each, just as the final question, I want to go to all of you. I have a piece that I think is coming out. We have a special report with mayors, and some of Jenny, you have a piece in there. Betsy, I think you might too. And we have profiles of what's coming in, but kind of looking at, you know, these, you know, inclusion on a lot of fronts, but also this intergenerational question. But I got intrigued with the power, what I would call, you know, I'm not going to get this right, so I apologize in advance. You know, we all have powerful women conferences, and they, you know, they're gluts of them. But the most powerful voter in the country is probably the least powerful woman. 50, 60 years old, financially strapped, running hard. 95% of those women vote, and a lot of those women are frustrated with their circumstances. And I'm interested in whether there's a sensitivity to that powerful voter out there and her frustrations and her challenges. And if you look at its healthcare, you know, and even, you know, student debt is one of it, because so many parents take over their children's student debt, and it becomes, frankly, elder debt, you know, in this. And I'm interested in whether or not that's in the calculus of how you're thinking about the sensitivities you're reaching. Jenny?
I would say, I mean, if you look at the Women's March and everything else, it's time to get out of the way and let women do it. I mean, and I don't mean that to be, but it's just like we are at a time now where it's like, okay, we got a harness, and it's time to take over. And support people, but it's like we know that women have, number one, economically suffered the most in our country if you look across all demographic groups. And you look at the burden of raising children, almost always placed on the women. Leaving the workforce to raise the children, almost always the women. People who take parental leave and never come back. And I think, but if you also look at the resource that is available, don't do it because that's where the vote is. Do it because if you do it, you're going to have a smarter, better community.
And you think that this community is reorganizing itself in a way that they're not deep.
I do. I think it's kind of no mas.
Yeah.
You know, we're done.
Right.
It's time for action.
And I think
Francis?
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Many of these senior women that you're seeing, and not just 50, but 60 and 70 and more, are outliving their husbands. And now they're in the driver's seat on the finances. They're in the driver's seat. And you never make policy based on one specific group. But clearly you listen to every group, and that's a group that's become very vocal, as they should be. But I believe everybody brings something to the table, and you're listening to all these groups. And that group of senior women, they're your best volunteers. If you're looking for great philanthropic people, at a smaller scale and great volunteers, they're the first ones I'll tap lots of times and say, we got this need, I need 20 volunteers to work on it. And it's the senior sisters that we call first. And they may reach down and bring their husbands if they're there, and their sons and their daughters and their grandchildren with them, but they're the best to step up and help.
So that's looking at the elder community as asset, not liability.
Yeah, absolutely,
Francis?
it's an asset.
I'm always surrounded by powerful women.
We got him right where we want him.
That's right.
I have no
Come
brother.
on my couch.
Yes, ma'am. I have no brothers, 3 sisters, a wife, and a mother. And my father works for them. But definitely in our community, mis abuelitas, my grandmothers, if you will, my proxy grandmothers, I call them, they are incredibly powerful, incredibly engaged, and they have a lot of needs. And they're not afraid to tell you what their needs are. The reason why we developed this elderly rental program was by interacting with them, was by going and visiting to the senior centers and areas where they live, and they literally will grab you, and they'll tug you, and they will tell you, ¿a dónde está mi vivienda? You know, where's my unit, my housing unit? And then once they got a housing unit, well, look, I can't pay for cable, or I can't, you know. So I think to be a good public policy maker, I think everybody would agree, every mayor would agree, first and foremost, you have to be a good listener. And if you're reflective of what are the needs, then you can go back to your staff, the ones that like me so much, and say, hey guys and women, what are we going to do to solve this problem? Because we have, I'm sure each person here, Seattle, Fort Worth, we have over $1 billion budget, right? You know, and so the question is, how are you prioritizing that budget? And what are you doing to move the needle to allow people to live in dignity with a quality of life, particularly at the later stage of their life, where they're not going to be able to make more money, they're not going to be able to go out into the workforce most likely, and they want to live in dignity and with dignity and deserve to live in dignity, particularly given what they've done for us, for our generation, and given us everything essentially.
We haven't talked at all about retraining our senior workers. That's a reskilling is the big word now.
Well, I mean,
that's a really big thing with the community colleges and the universities now, and you've got to offer that tuition and that ability to come back. They need to connect with whoever's teaching it, and it's got to be, in many cases, our community college offers it for free if you're over 60.
You know, I want, go ahead, Jen.
I was going to say, and there's some things you can do that at the time seem small, but have a magnified impact. For example, one of the things I was able to put in place was to give free transit cards to every Seattle public school student. So kids had the way to get around our city. And the more we worked and saw phenomenally how this opened up frontiers for people, I started going into some of our senior centers, and particularly our low-income senior housing, and finding that they too were basically homebound and didn't have access to many of the parts of our city and the amenities. So we started giving them both reduced and sometimes free transit. And the stories about how it changed their lives, their ability to get to their doctor, their ability to go to the places downtown that are some of the most remarkable public realm we have, but they didn't have access to it. So I think as a city, you have to be thinking, what are those things we take for granted? That if we turn the dial here, it's going to open up so much livability and opportunity for folks.
Well, thank you. This has been a great conversation. I would love to have another forum, another day with the three of you on lifelong learning, on training, on the credentialing that's going on across the spectrum, but also, you know, with the 50-plus community, because they've got so many assets. So how do you free up that talent and make it nimble and make it part, which is a whole nother conversation. But we've got a few minutes for questions here. And can I just say thank you to all of you at the door? Like, I just want you to know it is not lost on me that you're standing here and that we don't have enough seats. And as I told some of you, I thought you were all going to be at impeachment. But we're grateful to you. So we'll figure it out. We'll squeeze you in and whatever. But thank you. Yes, right here, we've got a question. Comment? Oh, a seat. I don't care about seats right now. This gentleman here, right here. Yes, hi. And we've got a microphone there. We're streaming online. Hey, good, great. No, we've got TV. So.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'd like to just say first and foremost that I agree with the NFL and Mayor Suarez. Miami is the best city.
Okay.
You both have wonderful cities as well. But now I turn to something a little more serious. The average age of Fortune 500 CEOs, mayors, senators, governors is on the average high 50s, low 60s. The median wealth of people in that age group is in cases triple or quadruple that of people in their late 20s or early 30s. Based on what I've heard today, how do you respond to the impression that is given off that you're blunting the impact of economic changes that affect us all and basically giving away stuff to people who already have most of the wealth and power in this country?
Thank you. Francis?
Sure. So in the case of Miami, I can tell you that that is not the narrative. In other words, the elderly in our community, like I said, are living on $700, $800, $900 a month in rent. I'm sorry, in income, and they're paying 80 to 90% of their income in rent. So they are, by any measure, by any definition, severely cost burdened. Usually 30% of your income or more is cost burdened. 50% is severely cost burdened, and we have people that are paying 80 to 90%. So in the case of Miami, which is, you know, experiencing the same growth, explosion of growth, attraction of investment, that's all happening in Miami, just like it's happening in these cities. In the elderly population, you don't see, it's not a wealthy city. In fact, it's a very, very poor city. And we're doing everything we can to help them live in dignity. To me, that's the most important part, which is they've done everything for us. They helped, you know, in my case, my grandparents who are not alive, you know, obviously helped me be educated,
right.
helped me get to where I am today. And what do we give? How are we giving back to them who are living beyond paycheck to paycheck, probably borrowing money or getting subsidized by their family members?
I would say to your question, though, real quickly, that it raises really important questions about
Without a doubt.
inequality within that age spectrum and
Sure.
why it is what it is. So not to, because I asked the question earlier about zero-sum games between generations, but within a generation is also a legitimate question. Yes, right here.
Hello, and I thank you all for coming. Steve, it's always a pleasure. Mayor Durkin, you said that, you know, women are kind of no mas. And so with that, my twin's father is a boomer. I'm Gen X, I have a millennial, and then I have some Gen Yers. And with that, and knowing that there are innate skills that kind of can be applied, that we can create economy and workforce development, I would love to know where the mayoral stance is on kind of working to kind of, with government, to remove certain legislations and regulations that would then free up that human capital that we're talking about and those assets that are kind of built within these generations.
I'm going to give this to Betsy and Francis as well so that we can wrap up here, but go ahead, Jenny.
I think you've hit it on the nail. I think we have to do it in a very intentional way across the spectrum, and we have to be looking for where those barriers are and how do we fix it. Let me give you an example. Uber Lyft drivers. They're one of the biggest gig economy sectors in the city of Seattle, but the amount of time people spend behind the wheel, their actual minimum wage is well below our $15 minimum wage. And so we put in place, after working with the companies and everyone else, a minimum wage and expenses, real expenses for drivers. We have a study in the field, we'll put it in place. We also put into place one of the first legislations in the nation on domestic workers, to make sure that domestic workers not only got paid adequate wages, but they got rest breaks and the like. So looking at the various sectors where there can be those kind of different generational types to make sure that the industries that attract those gig workers are treating workers fairly.
Thank you. Betsy Price?
Yeah, I think you have to take into account where everybody is on the spectrum and what they're doing. We're just about out of time, but you really have to be aware and open and listening, and you don't want to put barricades in place. It's oftentimes not about removing what's there, although many times it is, but more often than not, it's the policies that people want placed. You can't vote to the small group that's going to put barriers in the way of other groups. You have to weigh those out and see what the impact is on everybody's lives.
Francis, I'm going to give you the last word, strangely,
Good.
here. But if you can answer this question, but I'm also interested in, you know, because you put your housing plan. If you were to add another big hurdle to get over in your plan, what would that be?
More money. Okay. Listen, we started with $1 million, and we know that it's a drop in the bucket. We know that it's going to help about 700-800 seniors. And we know we're in the process of finalizing a housing master plan, affordable housing master plan, that we know needs to create and renovate about 50,000 units. So we're talking about orders of magnitude. Mm-hmm. But frankly, as was being said by Jenny, you know, the reason why we come up here is to get ideas. Mm-hmm. We come up here to listen. We come up here to right. discuss these issues with each other, because you know, we like to borrow each other's ideas and then come home and brand them as our own. You know?
I don't know.
Well, with that, I want to thank you. You know, this in a way, this conference started as an idea with Nancy Lamont. You'll hear from her later, and Jenny Durkin. Jenny and I met at the City Lab conference here in Washington and began discussing some of these various issues. So I want to thank all of you, but Jenny Durkin and Mayor of Seattle, thank you for at least planning this idea with me. Yep. Francis Suarez, thank you so much for you and your team. It was great. Betsy Price, we're going to see each other in Fort Worth again soon, I'm sure. Thank you all. Please welcome, and we'll be back for the next panel soon.
Thank you, mayors. Now for leaders from cities that dot the heartland of America. Please welcome Mayor Brian Barnett from Rochester Hills, Michigan, Mayor Michelle De La Isla of Topeka, Kansas, and Mayor Quentin Lucas from Kansas City, Missouri. The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, will lead this conversation.
All righty, thank you, mayors, for participating in this panel. You know, I have to start off with Mayor Lucas. Big Chiefs fan, big ESPN story on the mayor today. Can I get an early prediction on the Super Bowl?
You know, some of you who watched Saturday Night Live in the 80s and 90s may remember the super fans, and they would say, like, the Bears 80, you know, whoever else 10. I won't be that extreme. I will say Chiefs 41, 49ers 28.
Okay, wow.
All right, we've got a few.
Okay, all right. Okay, I want to go down the line. Impeachment trial has begun, and that is the big topic, certainly, of Washington. And starting with you, Mayor Lucas, I want you to talk about one issue each that people back home, your constituents, are talking about. You can't pick the same one. So what's one big issue that your constituents are talking about if it's not impeachment?
And I will say impeachment is not the focus of any conversation back home in the Midwest. I think for us right now, the issue is violent crime. How do we make our community safer? Many of you might have seen that Kansas City had a great day on Sunday with a football game, but then there was a mass shooting in Kansas City shortly thereafter. And so that continues to be a key issue that we try to address each day.
Ms. Mayor?
Ditto, I can't take it. And I think that in Topeka, one of the things that we're talking a lot about is medical care. How do we ensure that everybody is taken care of? And we're excited about that. Kansas is finally talking about the expansion of Medicaid. But I think that there's so many citizens that are struggling to take care of their health so that they could be productive in our society, that's a really big topic of conversation.
Fairly hyper-local to Southeast Michigan, I think in our region, people are always focused on the economy. You know, having lived through a recession, still largely tied to the automobile industry. We've had a lot of good years, but there's some tremors out there, and I think most of the articles, most of the discussion is about where's the economy going in the next 6 to 12 months.
Mayor Barnett, just to follow up on that, you know, America is aging right now. What have you found in your vicinity, in your city, of 50-plus people? What are the challenges they're facing? I mean, federally, there's a lot of challenges that Washington's going to have to tackle at some point. But what are the obstacles that they face, as well as, you know, healthcare and the fact that are we ready, both at the state and local issues, for the baby boomers to fully retire?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. We spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I think as elected officials, you had 3 great mayors on the panel before. One thing I'm really proud of is the way I think local leadership is leading in this space and really trying to engage the senior population. Again, in Rochester Hills, you know, as it relates to healthcare, one of the interesting things, you've seen some of the presidential candidates come through and talk about the price of prescription drugs and how the fact that you can go across the border to Canada and get things much cheaper than you can just across the bridge here in Metro Detroit. And so that's certainly an issue. But I think if I went back to my first answer, a lot of what we're really focused on is trying to include the senior population in the next economy, including them in the future, that they see a future in Rochester Hills. A lot of that might be, as we talked about earlier, about the discussion of how autonomous vehicles, how mobility is going to change for our senior population, how that can be a good thing, not something to be fearful of, but something that could embrace and extend their mobility into the later years of their lives. And so we spend a lot of time being very intentional about topics that are really important. I said earlier real quickly that whether it be autonomous vehicles, bringing them in to see that, or Michigan legalized marijuana this year. We brought weed into our senior center and explained to them what it was, where you can use it, what is permissible, what isn't. And so it's a little bit funny, but you saw a lot of learning happen with people go, oh, okay, this is something that's happening, that's relevant, and we want to be intentional about including our seniors.
Mayor De La Isla, you have announced that you're running for Congress in the 2nd District.
Correct.
Why? Why do you want to come to the swamp?
So as mayor, one of the blessings that I've had is that I get a chance to engage with our constituents one-on-one on a regular basis. And when I have the conversations with them about the issues that matter the most, like we just discussed, impeachment is not one of them. When you look at what people in Kansas are concerned about is how are they going to pay their bills? We have an aging population that is going to have a lot of medical needs. I just spoke with somebody from Lecompton. He was telling me that Opdivo, a cancer medication, was $89,000 every 28 days. Okay? And as a person that has lupus, has cancer, and has had no health insurance, I understand the challenge of having to open up your mailbox and look at the pile of bills and try to figure out how you're going to deal with it and whether you're going to pay the house or who you're going to play with. The other thing that we're concerned about is the job situation. We talk about how wonderful our economy is. Wow, great unemployment records. When are we going to start talking about the fact that we have a significant amount of underemployment in our communities? When you look at Southeast Kansas, it's compelling to look at the people that are struggling to trying to find a job. And how are we talking about education? How are we going to start infusing programs that actually work to get people back to work? So these are things that are personal to me. I've been homeless. I know what it is not to have health insurance. I know what it is to struggle to pay those bills, and my credit showed it at one point in time. And I think that the citizens of Kansas, and especially in the 2nd Congressional District, where these challenges are so salient, need somebody that's going to go out there and going to stand up for them, understanding what those issues are, to make policies that work, and to start to debunk this system that says that we're going to put up our bootstraps and it's all going to work, because it's not true.
Along those lines, you were homeless as a teenager.
I was.
So explain the safety net that was or wasn't there for you.
So I always tell people that my story is not my story, it's your story. I had everything from my neighbor that I still call my mom, that fed me when I was a kid. Then it was Mami Pucci, who when I was, trying to get my life back together, she let me stay in a cot in her house. Then it was the dean that let me go back to school so that I could get in student loan debt, but I could pay some bills with that. And then there was Father Pat, that when I was singing at church, he was just like, hey, we're going to take care of you. We know that you're doing well, but we want to send you out of here. But all along my life, I didn't know how to navigate the systems that I have been able to overcome. I had people hold me by the hand and walk with me. And I think that that was the difference. It was all of the people that didn't have to care, that did for one reason or another, that blessed me immensely.
Mayor Lucas, you've had, last year you held a forum on livability for 50-plus populations. What did you learn from that, and what programs do you have for people over 50?
I like to think that every program that we create in Kansas City, and I've been mayor for 5.5 months, and I'm proud of the fact that we've created a good number, try to be equitable in all ways, right? A lot of people have run for office lately talking about looking at things through a racial equity lens. I also think we need to look at things through a lens of age equity and making sure things are accessible. So other things you might have heard about. We have a Mayor's Ambassador program, which is an internship program for retirees. We have 3 folks that will be in the mayor's office working on any number of issues. Because one of the things that we were addressing recently, I'm planning to pardon 8,000 folks with marijuana convictions on their records at the misdemeanor level. And the hardest part, I agree, thank you. It is my counterpoint to Mayor Barnett bringing weed to the homes. I bring a pardon, so we're working together. There we go. The Michigan-Missouri Compromise. But as part of that, it's vital for us to actually reach people. And we know that there are lots of folks out there that have so much that they want to give to their communities. That's just one. In Kansas City, we've also proposed, and we're finding our budget funding for zero fare transit, or an entirely free public transportation system. The goal there is very simple: to make sure that there aren't barriers to entry to folks of all ages, but particularly folks who rely on transit each day to get to that doctor's appointment, to get to some level of freedom, frankly. And so what I learned from that forum, and what I've learned from my time in office and campaigning, is that we have to make sure that everything we're looking at, make sure that everyone can avail themselves of the opportunities to be a citizen of Kansas City.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Barnett, infrastructure, it's something that Washington has talked about a lot, but not as far as a comprehensive bill has not passed. Do you see that changing, and what does the effect of Washington not acting affect the local level?
Yeah. Let me start by saying that I should have added that when we brought the weed, we also brought it back with us. We didn't leave it there. just to leave that story with a little bit of a hang. You know, I think that we were all really encouraged about where infrastructure might be this far into President Trump's presidency, and both the Republicans and the Democrats had promised some pretty significant infrastructure packages. Of course, we've seen zero from Washington. And so, you know, what mayors have to do, what city leaders have to do is, you know, you have a couple choices. It's really pretty simple. You can raise taxes, you can cut services, or you can innovate. And around infrastructure, in Michigan too, the governor ran and was elected largely on fixing the damn roads. And that was her slogan, trying to figure out a way to fix infrastructure. I think we've sort of recognized that our help is not going to come from Washington. And so we have to be innovative in how we approach it. What does that mean in my community in Rochester Hills? Well, we looked at some of the things that we were funding and diverted funds. We said, okay, we don't need, when this bond falls off, we'll repurpose this for local road funding. We've tried to seek very specific sources of funding for our local streets. We've also entered into some unique sort of public-private partnerships. But infrastructure also is not just roads. You're talking earlier about inclusive communities, and one of the things that we're really proud of is trying to engage the senior community in all aspects of our life, right, including play. We recognize when we thought about playgrounds, we thought about kids. I have kids. We thought about kids. Kids are going to like slides. Kids are going to like swings. Kids. And we recognize that who brings kids to the playground, right? A lot of times it's grandmas and grandpas. And so we now design all of our playgrounds with generational playgrounds, senior focused, immediately adjacent, if not combined with the children's playgrounds, so that you have this intergenerational opportunity. So infrastructure can be roads. We recognize Washington probably isn't going to do anything in the next year significant related to infrastructure. We've had to be innovative in how we approach that. But it's not just roads, it's also how you want your community to develop so that you're inclusive to everyone.
What if, one of you jump in about infrastructure at the local level? I mean, there have been numerous reports about just whether it's roads or highways or whatever, just crumbling. Do you see that in your cities?
Absolutely. I can tell you that we were just here in DC in December, I think, and we were talking to our delegation here in the federal level, and we have the Polk Quincy Viaduct. We are I-70, which is one of the most important corridors, especially for the bioagro industry. And we have a curve that when you look under it, A, the curve is extremely dangerous, and B, when you're under the bridge, there's pieces that fall. And when it rains, you see the rain come through. And as we've been talking with the state, we're trying to figure out how to do partnerships, but we need support. I mean, because that fix, I think, is $340 million. And it's significant. I mean, the problems that we're having with infrastructure in our communities are significant. And it's not just highways, and it's not just roads, it's also the bridges.
That's right.
You know, I might say one thing. I'll get to infrastructure in 1 second, but I so appreciate Mayor Barnett talking about the grandparents, in some situations, the great-grandparents who are taking care of young people, right? Our families, the way we live, the way our communities exist, are different perhaps than they were 30, 40 years ago. In the inner city of Kansas City, throughout Kansas City, you have lots of folks who are primary guardians and are a senior age but are taking care of folks. And we need to think about literally everything we do when we think of our places where people can play or recreate. You have to think about not just the 7-year-old, but the 70-year-old. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do more of as well. On infrastructure, we have the same challenges that everyone else has, and we try our best to be creative, but I said this recently. One challenge we face isn't so much from Washington, because I'll just tell you about how we all live in the hinterlands, and I'm proud to be from them, is that we don't even worry about y'all. We let you do your thing. I turn on the nightly news for a minute, I'm like, what? And then I just move back to a Chiefs game. But nevertheless, what I mean by that seriously though is that we really know that we have to come up with a lot of our own answers. But what we want is at least where we say this is a unique and pressing problem. The bridge that's collapsing, or the bridge that's closed down, or the only way we get around. We want to just actually be able to call Washington and say, look, there are resources for this. Just fund them. Just be consistent to what you did in at least the 80s or the 90s. And so much we're finding ourselves with fewer resources there, which is requiring our taxpayers to pay, I think, far more on sales taxes, local property taxes, which is fundamentally unsustainable long term.
In a few minutes, we'll open up to audience questions, so get your questions ready. I want to go back to the issue of homelessness, which of course affects all ages. The economy, by some standards, certainly is doing well. Unemployment rate is low. Stock market is at all-time high. But the amount of homeless is really striking, both anecdotally around here in D.C. We had some experts at an event recently, and it was, this is a real problem. And Mayor Barnett, let's start with you. What is the solution here?
Well, get your pens ready, because I've got the solution to homelessness. No, you know, but for the grace of God, I don't deal with it in my community, much like some of my colleagues do. But as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, I would tell you that this is the issue of the day. And I can tell that by the fact that when we host this meeting this week, when we had a homelessness forum maybe 4 years ago, we'd get the first 2 rows. Now we can't find a room big enough, because not only is it expanded in traditionally cities that experience this, like Los Angeles and San Francisco, but it's happening in cities like Salt Lake and other places where before they might have a couple folks that they dealt with. They could almost deal with it like a family, like a church could deal with it. Now it's 200, it's 300. Before it was 30. Now in a place that it was 200, now it's 1,000. So this is the issue of the day. I think it's actually overtaken opioids as the thing that mayors are really focused on now. And certainly, you know, I think there are a lot of mayors who are looking at some innovative solutions to how to deal with it, whether it be, you know, from certainly as Mayor De La Isla will talk to you about, the component that can't be left out is the mental health component that has to be an absolute part from the beginning of every homelessness discussion. But we have mayors that are working on zoning, we have mayors that are working on funding, we have mayors that are working on, you know, from a civil rights perspective, what are some lessons and what are some things you should do, what are some things you shouldn't do. I don't think there's a solution yet, but you have a lot of mayors working really hard, because this is the top issue for most of the folks gathering this week in Washington. The mayors will be here, about almost 300 mayors. It's a topic that we're going to be speaking with. On Friday, we're in the White House with Secretary Carson, and so we're going to continue the discussion there. But we've got a lot of opportunities to continue this discussion.
Mayor De La Isla.
So I think that when we talk about homelessness, homelessness is a symptom, right? And we try to throw money at the homeless issue without addressing what the symptom is. One of my favorite analogies of this is you're fishing and you see a body go down the river and you pick it up and you see another body go down the river. But if you know that there's more bodies coming and you're not looking up the river, you have a problem, right? So we have to address the fact that there is a significant amount of individuals that are homeless because they have mental health issues that are not being addressed. And we also have individuals that for years have not been able to save. And then you are one medical crisis away from having to file bankruptcy. And then maybe not even being able, because you've moved from apartment to apartment, to find a place to live, so you all of a sudden become homeless. The other thing that we're not talking about, that I don't really hear a lot of people talk about, is the fact that there's a lot of women that are homeless because they've been victims of human trafficking. And there is so much, there are so many root causes that we are, because they're so difficult, we're not really looking at them and addressing them and conversing about them. And there's this myth that in this country, if you work really hard, you're going to move ahead. But it's not. Being poor is expensive. It's extremely expensive, which is why we have so much homelessness. Because when you don't know where to look for the help, and where the help is not afforded in the right place, you perpetuate the problem.
I was just going to say, let the church say amen. I'm with you. I think the mayor identifies two areas, and this is how we usually attack homelessness in Kansas City. One is the mental health, substance abuse, significant challenge. The other is, frankly, the housing insecurity, you are one bill away, you're one challenge away sort of thing. And we need to realize when us mayors, we love to all talk about economic development and say this big thing just opened and we're proud of ourselves, we're on the cover of the paper. We also have to realize our job is to make sure that when we're getting new jobs, there's access to those jobs for people of all income levels, that they're actually hitting their performance promises on bringing jobs that are transit accessible, et cetera. Because what we're doing right now is missing the boat on so much of that. But a few things we're trying to do in Kansas City, and I will tell you straight up, it is not enough, so I don't have the cure. But one is to make sure that what we're not doing with those who are suffering from mental health or addiction is criminalizing their illness. Too often in years past, for the past generations in Kansas City, the way we dealt with these issues was if you were drunk and on a corner, right, we throw you in jail. You get out the next night, we arrest you again, we just repeat cycle. For better or worse, our jails are crowded, overcrowded, so we can't address it that way now. Now the time is crying out for us to say, let's invest in social workers, let's invest in mental health, let's invest in more resources. That's something that we're doing right now in Kansas City. And on the other end, that housing insecurity side, I grew up knowing that too, where that one bill, $200 behind, anything like that, particularly in parts of the Midwest where you have to have a car often, can leave you without the job opportunity you need. So finding ways to give small grants to folks, helping people fix up their houses in certain situations, particularly our senior population, is a way that we can keep people from ever getting into homelessness. Because one thing, this will be my final point, like you were saying, once you get into something, be it a criminalized life, be it homelessness, it is damn hard to get out. And so a big thing for us is making sure folks are never trapped in it.
Last question will go to you, Mayor Barnett, before I go to audience questions. Does Washington, D.C. respect America's mayors?
You know, if they don't, they should. And I think every day you see America's mayors proving themselves over and over. I'm incredibly, obviously I may be a little biased, but I'm incredibly proud of the record that we have in the face of many times inaction. I could go to D. Margo down in El Paso and what he's done in his city to address the immigration challenges in the face of inaction in Washington. You could go to John Cranley in Cincinnati and Mayor Kapsikevich in Toledo, what they're doing with gun measures in a red state in the face of inaction from Washington. You know, mayors understand that they can't hide behind podiums and give speeches and dance behind rhetoric. They have to deliver results. And that might sound cliche, but we can back that up with example after example of mayors, whether it be from innovative economic development solutions to harnessing innovation. All these things, I think mayors are really where the rubber meets the road. And listen, I think that mayors are respected. I mean, you've got two mayors that are doing fairly well in the presidential election. And that may not have been the case a few years ago. I think the American public respects us, and that's what I think is more important. In study after study, the level of government that people respect the most is not Washington, it's not state capitals, it's mayors and local leaders, and there's a reason. So I care more about my residents respecting me than I care about what Washington thinks, and that seems to be happening.
Mm-hmm. We'll open it up to questions. We have mics around the room. If you can raise your hand and wait for the mic to get to you and identify yourself. And if you can keep it brief so we can get a few of these in.
Hi, I'm Megan Tracy Benson. I work for Empowering the Ages, a nonprofit based here in the DC area. And I wanted to go back to what Mayor Barnett said about playground design and really intentional design to bring generations together. Are there any initiatives that you have ongoing or that you would aim to bring to your cities that would do that in other arenas? Bringing generations together through design?
Yeah, great question. You know, we were sort of introduced to this through the U.S. Conference of Mayors and through seeing some of the relationships specifically with the AARP. They helped fund our first intergenerational playground. The success of that has had us look again through our Parks Department at how we design play in the future. So we're developing a new park called Innovation Hills. That park is designed where, 2 years ago, it would have been, I think about my kids, what's the coolest things my kids want to play on, right? Now it's a comprehensive look about being all-inclusive. We're designing Michigan's largest all-inclusive playground right now with a focus on our senior citizens. So I know that our roadmap has changed dramatically because of our first experience and the success of that. And certainly we're trying to replicate those things through the Conference of Mayors as well. AARP has been tremendously supportive of that.
Hi, my name is Anna Veria. I come from the Department of Behavioral Health. I really appreciate your mentioning about mental health issues and the opioid issues that plague us these days. Now, census data says that there has been an increase in the suicide rate among males, senior males who are 50 and above. And primarily that's because men have less resilience in terms of change in their lives, according to the data. And women have more resilience. So in terms of actions by cities, what are your immediate actions towards these high-risk groups who are plagued with depression due to isolation?
I mean, the most direct thing we did, and the last word you said is the point, is we're trying to actually address senior isolation. And there are several different ways to do that. My internship program, while useful for us, is also useful, I think, for getting more folks that are engaged in the city and what's going on. We have a city council group that is for folks of a senior age. We get out often to make sure, particularly through the Department of Parks and Recreation, but for more of our resources to make sure we're engaging folks. In some ways, it's in the same way that you leave no child behind. I guess we're largely trying to say that we're leaving no one behind in our community, spending, frankly, more investment than we have in years past on classic community organizing. The sort of thing that is getting people out there knowing that not everybody's checking the emails that come from the city or even seeing something on the television news. And so for us, it's a story of isolation, or avoiding isolation, and building more relationships with different actors at the city and supporting nonprofits that are largely doing that in more situations.
Yes, I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet TV. We talk about all the issues and challenges, but the one thing I haven't heard much about are the solutions and the best practices coming out. What would be a couple of best practices that you could share that you're really proud of that'd be helpful here, but also that we can report on around the globe? Because many of these issues, I've been in 97 countries now, and they're mostly the same issues that we're discussing here this afternoon. And thank you for being here.
So at least with regards to the aging population, because it seems like we've started really focusing there, one of the things that we're focusing on is complete streets and making sure that those streets are accessible, because some of our aging population have different needs. Making sure that we have more public places that are gratuitous so that everybody can participate in them. And at least in Topeka, with regards to solutions for the population, one of the things that has been really exciting is the merger of the traditionalists and the boomers working with young people to move our community forward. So we have really created ways that everybody has a platform and that people feel like they have access. The other big thing that we're doing is trying to consolidate our volunteering databases so that seniors and other individuals that want to be still active in our community have easy access on finding ways that they can still provide something back to their cities.
And I would say just briefly, because the question was incredibly broad, to go to the U.S. Conference of Mayors website, we all put our best practices together kind of by category, by climate, by economic development, by homelessness, and you'll see a bunch of information there about national best practices.
Hi, Donna Butts, Generations United, and for 30 years we've advocated for intergenerational solutions. I want to say kudos to Mayor Lucas for being home to one of the only grandparent apartment buildings in the country, Pemberton Park. And as you've acknowledged, there are a number of, the numbers increasing in terms of multi-generational families and intergenerational families. So I'm wondering if Topeka and Rochester Hill are also thinking about how to better serve those important families.
Yeah, led with this, I'll just briefly say this. You know, Metro Detroit and Rochester Hill is really driven by the auto industry, and one of the conversations we're having is how autonomous vehicles isn't and shouldn't be a scary thing for our senior population. We spend so much time focused on the last mile, but most people don't realize you'll live a decade after your driving privileges are probably going to expire or be taken away. So instead of focusing on the last mile, focusing on the last decade, it's not about texting while going to work. It's about my grandma, who lives in my city, having the opportunity and the freedom and the mobility to get to doctor's appointments, to get to the grocery store. And so whether it's housing, being intentional about those conversations with the senior population in your community is incredibly important. And we found that that has just tremendous benefits for us, as now our population isn't scared about autonomous vehicles. They recognize it, and they're pushing us to get it sooner so that mobility is something that's easier for them to attain.
And in regards to Topeka, one of the exciting things that we've done is AARP gave us a grant so that we could put in a brand new swing in one of our most underserved areas where you have a lot of the grandparents raising their kiddos, so that the grandparents could actually sit with their kiddos and participate in the swinging so that they could just have that access. So we're not there yet at the housing level talking about how to merge those two together, but we are doing small things in our community to start bridging people.
Mayors steal ideas a lot, so we'll be talking to Mayor Lucas afterwards.
Yes.
We have time for one more.
Hi, I'm Steve Culbertson from Youth Service America. The old model of mayors was to look at young people in their communities as the future of the community or the hope of tomorrow, future's leaders. But I think what we're seeing with young people today, I just came from the day of racial healing over at the Kennedy Center. It's clear young people are leading today, whether we're looking at Greta, whether we're looking at Emma, you know, and the other kids down at Parkland, whether we're looking at, you know, all kinds of issues facing the community. What will you be doing in the future as mayors to engage young people as leaders of today and of the hope of today, not the hope of tomorrow?
So I can talk about our youth council. It is amazing. Actually, Bryce Litke, who is the chair of our youth commission, is coming to be with us in the Conference of Mayors. Our youth has their own council. I'm the mayor of the council, so it's not like they have their own thing and we kind of see what they do. They set their agenda, they set their action plans, and we bring together the leaders of our community so that they could hear what they have to say and start moving their agenda forward. And it's just been amazing to see their participation and how they're shaping our community.
You know, I was going to say that, we're doing a lot more listening, particularly with a lot of our youth in the inner city. Too often the mayor or a prosecutor comes in and says, this is what's wrong, be like us, you know, one day you can be a mayor like us. Instead, we flipped that and said, what do you actually want? What do you need from this community? And then how can we put you in positions to make some change? With our short amount of time, one other thing I've done a lot of, in the city of Kansas City, we can appoint, the mayor appoints 900 board and commission appointments, which is a ridiculous number. But we have made a concerted effort to get more young people of color, more folks that have not been represented before to have a real voice. You don't have to be a homeowner to be on the planning commission, because frankly, what you think about your community matters too. And if you're going to be around for a while, it really matters a lot for us. And so that's an idea that we're really trying to focus on.
Yeah, and I would just say two things. I mean, from a local perspective, in Rochester Hills, we have a very advanced youth council that you know, a youth council has to feel empowered, and quickly ours sits on everything from the traditional things to the committee that sets my salary. Youth are involved in that, so they're involved in every aspect of our government. But I'm really proud of what the Conference of Mayors has done, because we had our first ever youth summit this past year in Los Angeles. Our next one's coming up in Portland, and we engaged and we had this round table that was incredible because the issues were really interesting. From what size should your youth council be? Should you pay your youth council members? Because some folks can't, they have a job after school. It's important that they earn an income for their family, so they're not able to participate. We let students just dive into it, tear it up, mess it up, and we had a great understanding of, like, boy, our concept of what a youth council should be maybe isn't really what's effective. And just listen to them. We have the youth that will be a part of our conference this week. That'll be a major part of what we do here as mayors gathered in Washington, D.C. So we're plugged in. They aren't the future. They are right now. You see that nationally, you see that globally, and you see that in America's cities.
We've run out of time. This was a great discussion. Please thank the mayors for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to the mayors. Now it's time for the portion of the program produced by our underwriter, AARP. Please welcome Nancy Lamond, EVP and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer for AARP, with author and journalist Kathleen Koch.
Yeah. Somebody left glasses.
Glasses? Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
Let's get started doing a little myth busting. What would you say is the biggest misconception that most people have about AARP?
There are probably two.
Okay.
One is people are surprised that we do things at the local level. We're a large national organization. We've probably sent some people in this room a lot of mail over the years.
Not that dreaded letter that comes when you're 50.
Right, when you turn 50. But we also do a lot of work at the state and local level, have partnerships with mayors, which I know we'll talk about in a minute. And the second is that we're all about older people, which is not true. We're focused, obviously, on our constituency, older Americans, people over the age of 50. But increasingly, we're working, as I think all of the mayors have shown today, on intergenerational issues as well.
Well, you brought up the mayors, and we do have mayors here from Seattle all the way over to Miami, from across the country. Tell us about what exactly AARP is doing on the local level to build these communities that work for people of every generation. Because really, don't millennials and seniors want the same things from their community? They want affordable housing. They want good access to transportation. They want good access to to businesses, to shopping, to services.
Yeah. Well, a number of years ago, we took on being the leader in the U.S. for the World Health Organization Age-Friendly Communities Initiative. And now we have over 450 communities across the country, some as large as mega cities and others as small as 50 or 100 residents who have committed to take action on various aspects of livable communities. And one of the important
Should we give a shout out though to Fort Worth, because Mayor Fort Worth is here, and they were one of your first age-friendly cities, right?
Most of the mayors who've been here, I think, are part of age-friendly communities. And as you said before, the truth is that the kinds of issues that are at the forefront in communities big and small, things like affordable housing. Housing needs to be affordable whether you're on a fixed income or whether you're at your first job and not being paid very much and you still have college debt. Mobility, transportation services need to be available to take people where they need to go. People of all ages want good parks, sidewalks that you don't trip on. And so increasingly there are things that work for both older Americans and younger Americans. And a couple of the mayors talked about something we think is hugely important, and that's harnessing older Americans, particularly those who are retired, in volunteer opportunities. And many of the mayors mentioned some programs they have. What we'd like to see is even more mayors look at this asset of people over the age of 50.
I think of my mother, who's 85, who is retired in Kansas, and she volunteers every day with kids, first graders, helping them read.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, here you have people like your mother everywhere. Mm-hmm. They have a lot of energy. They have a lot of experience. They have a lot of skills. Many of them have a lot of time. And they have a powerful sense of legacy. They want to give back to their community, and there's no better group to harness. We have a partnership that we've just initiated with Cities of Service in a number of communities around the country where we are providing a grant, a couple of staff people, and technical assistance to these cities to develop clear programs, and many of them are in the mentoring area. We think this is going to be important and a contribution to growth in some of the communities.
Any thoughts on the generational divide? Is it real, and where it does exist, how important is it that we address it by 2035, which is the first year when in our country we will have more people over the age of 65 than under 18?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, as the mayor said on the previous panels, we have to have conversations, discussions with all generations on all issues that exist at the local level, state level, and national effort level. I hear more about intergenerational warfare or the intergenerational divide in the media and in places where people are really focused on how divided the country is. We tend not to hear that much from our members. And I think part of it is that what we're seeing is generations being closer than they have before. We have the highest percentage of Americans living in multi-generational households today than we have since the early 1950s. And some of that is the famous boomerang generation. And I was a recipient of a recent college graduate who decided to move back home.
A recipient, so this was a gift?
Right. Well, he quickly adapted. He felt it was a group home, and he, instead of calling us Mom and Dad, he called us Nancy and Steve. You know, but so you have younger people moving back home. You have, frankly, a lot of older people moving, grandparents, parents, moving back with their families as they're getting a little bit more infirmed and need some help. And so I think this is a trend we're going to see continue. And there's no intergenerational divide in that world. The other thing we had noted, somebody had told me recently this, there's kind of a family economy now. So in 2017, 28% of all workers provided support to their parents or their in-laws. And in 2018, 74% of adults helped an adult child pay down debt or pay for living expenses. This isn't just, you know, an occasional extra gift at birthday. This is really kind of an economic world that's existing throughout the family. And I think it's hard to have an intergenerational conflict. You might have conflicts, but it's hard to have a major intergenerational conflict when people are living together and helping one another that way.
Let's move to the election year.
Sure.
It's 2020. And when we look at senior voters, I think most people realize they are the most reliable voters, vote more frequently in greater numbers than any other age group.
Right.
But you've done a recent survey taking a look specifically at older women voters. What did you find?
Well, we found that, like older voters generally, they are a very large group of voters. 95% of the women in the survey said they intend to vote. 7 in 10 haven't made up their minds yet.
What does that say? If 7 in 10 haven't made up their minds?
Well, either they are looking at a very large field of candidates and haven't quite decided who they're going to support, or they're torn in terms of how they're going to vote one party or the other. One thing we know is that older women voters in particular are a swayable constituency right now. Majority had voted in the last election for President Trump, and then in 2018, you saw many more over the age of 50 women voting for the Democrat in the House, really based on healthcare issues. And healthcare is the issue for older women voters. It may well be the issue for everybody, but it is definitely going to be the issue for older women in this upcoming election.
So when you look to the future, are you hopeful when it comes to bridging whatever generational divide does exist and deepening this generational compact?
I am hopeful because, like all of you, we were listening to a generation of leaders earlier in this program who understand that in their communities they need to find ways to meet the needs of people of all ages. And so I am optimistic.
Because the silver tsunami is coming, right? You don't like that phrase?
Well, no. No, there's a certain negative aspect of world-altering water.
No, but I'm looking at the powerful aspect of it. It has power.
Well,
okay.
But the thing to remember too is in 2043 we're going to have millennials collecting Social Security. So the country is aging, but it's not one generation and done. We are aging for the very foreseeable future, and it's going to be really important for us to not only figure out how generations work together, but also how we create communities that are going to be terrific for older people as well.
And really lay the groundwork for the generations to come.
Yeah, and I think you have to look no farther than what the mayors are doing. They really are leading the way. I'm stunned that over 450 communities in the country have kind of signed on for age-friendly initiatives and work, and I think that's recognition that where people live, they want to see a world that's good for all of them.
Nancy Lamont, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thanks for
Wait, before you go.
So
Kathleen, you I can change the rules. So Steve Clemens with the Hill. I just want to ask one question because I love the conversation you just had. But as I've participated in this, thought about these issues, I'm just wondering if you want to take a swipe at community colleges, universities, schools. You know, we talk a lot about lifelong education. We talk a lot about credentialing. We talk a lot about the future of retirement being work and retraining people. But I get a sense there's a stigma that still exists out there when people are going back in universities. And I'd just love to know if you're bashing these colleges and community colleges into place, or are they cooperative and already working with you? What's that scene? Because I think it would be a mistake not to touch that topic.
Well, across the country, we have a lot of our states who are working with community colleges, and I think in most cases it's been a very, very good partnership. I think everybody is focused on how you give people skills so that they can go back in the workforce or stay in the workforce. And what we've found is there's a lot of enthusiasm, and as you and I have discussed before years ago, AARP did a lot of research because nobody liked the word retirement. And we couldn't find, we spent a lot of effort and money trying to find a new word. And by the end of it, I was looking at data and I said, well, we don't have to find a new word. The new word for retirement is called work. And we need to continue as an organization to look to provide those kinds of opportunities and to support older entrepreneurs. I think one of the mayors talked about the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs are over the age of 55. The gig economy, which was presumably built for young people, is actually serving older people as well, whether you're doing Airbnb, in order to pay some of those property taxes the mayor's talked about, or Uber drivers, or creating your own small business online. There's just a lot of need for these kind of part-time and full-time positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you to Nancy and Kathleen. Now for a more in-depth conversation about creating age-friendly communities, please welcome Michael Adams, Chief Executive Officer of SAGE, the oldest and largest organization in the country dedicated to improving the lives of LGBT older adults, Marianne Borgensen, the President of the National Association of Counties, Joe Buschino, President of the National League of Cities and Council Member from Los Angeles, and Karen Freeman Wilson, President and CEO of the Chicago Urban League and former Mayor of Gary, Indiana. The Hill staff writer Julia Manchester will lead this conversation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this very insightful conversation that I'm looking forward to having, and thank you all for coming. You know, this topic is so interesting to me because as a millennial, I don't fully understand it, but I look to my parents and I see that they're starting to get to an age where they're thinking about retirement. And I'm learning that there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that. And I'm learning that from them, their friends, my aunts and uncles. So I'm going to put this question to you all just broadly, and you can each answer it. What, in your minds, are some of the most unique challenges that are facing Americans who are 50 years or older? I'll start with you, Michael.
Sure. Well, you know, clearly one of the big challenges that older folks are facing is having the financial wherewithal to enter into the later years and to live in a healthy and vibrant way as we age. And this is certainly one of the challenges. Another that I would lift up is the challenge of maintaining a social connection. We have serious challenges with social isolation among older people in this country, and so those certainly, financial security and maintaining a social connection, seem to me to be two very important areas for us to focus on.
Absolutely. And Marianne, obviously as the president of NACO, you have a very interesting background dealing with this in terms of how it impacts communities and how communities can get involved. What's your experience with that?
So counties actually are very instrumental in the services that we provide to our older Americans. And counties fund the Older Americans Act through our Office on Aging. But the financial issues are important, the isolation, but also the mental health of our elderly. Because when you think of their retirement and you think that they still want to stay socially involved, financially vibrant, but they're also alone a lot of times. And so we have to be very cognizant of what mental health issues we need to provide them and have access for them.
Absolutely. And Joe, from your perspective, what are the most unique challenges that you're seeing in these communities?
Well, being able to plan in advance for our aging communities and ensuring that it's inclusive as we're planning, it's equitable and inclusive. Through my colleague here, Karen Freeman Wilson, and National League of Cities, with the partnership of AARP, we were able to elevate the importance of planning for our older neighbors in a way that it's equitable and fair. And we were able to do that through our Love My City campaign. And cities now across the country, 19,000 cities, towns, and villages that we represent, are able to pivot towards what we were able to accomplish this last year.
Absolutely. And just for clarification, so Karen, you used to hold Joe's position, is that correct? Yes.
Joe is the new Karen.
The new Karen, there we go.
I'm the old Joe.
Okay.
Whichever way you want to say
now
it.
we have him for the record. So Karen, you're obviously working at the Urban League of Chicago right now. From your experience, with that broader question of what challenges Americans 50 years and older are facing, how are you seeing that play out in Chicago?
So the first thing I want to do is be very clear, because I'm 59. So when you say 50 and older, I am not old. So anybody that wants to, so we are older, but I'm not old.
Right.
But in all seriousness, it's the issue of relevance. Joe mentioned planning, right? And people think about how they are going to navigate this territory, but even the best plans don't totally prepare you. As an example, I help my mother, who's 83, her sister, who's 80, navigate healthcare. You can't plan for that, right? Because it is, when you talk about just a tangled web, it absolutely is. And I think that's where our cities have the ability, and quite frankly, government has the ability to help us. And it doesn't seem like a role, but so many don't have family members who are in a position or who will take the time to help. And so that's where we can step in. But also when I talked about relevance, helping them to feel like there is still something that we need them to do and that we want them to do. And I think that's so important for the intergenerational opportunities that exist for not just folks that are 50 and older, but for the younger people who can learn from us.
Absolutely. Marianne, you brought up a very interesting point just now about mental health and what organizations are doing to help this particular age group of Americans deal with mental health and their future. How is NACO getting involved in that, and how important is it to address mental health with this age group?
So as president of the association this year, the president gets to pick an initiative. And if you look at, by 2035, our 60-year and older population is going to exceed our 18-year-olds. And so that got me started to really think and look at what we were doing in terms of our counties across the country and what issues we have to look at. And if you look at the mental health issue, we have focused on our mental health in jails. We have focused on our children and our adolescents. And now I think it's time that we really start to focus on our elderly. So looking at those programs. So through our Office on Agings, which again, counties are, they govern the Office on Agings in sometimes their own county or else in a regional setup. And those are programs that through our senior centers that we really take and participate in to make sure that we have, and they know that there are resources out there for them for mental health services.
Absolutely. Michael, you work with a specific part of this age group, the LGBTQ community. Talk about the unique challenges that members of this community in this age group face and how your organization and other organizations are preparing them to face these challenges and really overcome them.
Sure, and the context I think for that conversation is that we all know that our life experiences impact and shape our aging experience. And so people from different communities, whether it's LGBT folks, people of color, LGBT elders of color, are going to have different experiences later in life. What we see in terms of the work that we do with LGBTQ older adults are, among other things, very high levels of social isolation and thin support networks. That comes substantially from the fact that LGBT folks of the generations we work with are much less likely to be parents, right? Much less likely to be parents, much more likely to grow old, single, and living alone. And because of historical discrimination, much more likely to be disconnected from their families of origin. So there are serious gaps there when it comes to social connection and support. Those gaps create a greater need for services, a greater need for professionalized care. But unfortunately, even in this day and age, we still find a combination of discrimination and perhaps even more than discrimination, a lack of information and knowledge to provide that care and those services in competent and effective ways. And so as a national organization, SAGE works with our affiliates and programs all across the country and with many partners to try to address those issues. And you could think of that as happening, in a sense, in two tracks. One of those tracks is creating spaces and programs that are specifically designed for LGBTQ older adults to help address their needs. But the solutions at the end of the day will come more significantly from opening up the spaces that already exist for all older people and making them accessible and welcoming for LGBT folks. So a number of years ago, we launched in partnership with the Administration for Community Living, the National Resource Center on LGBT aging that provides those resources. And we run a national training program called SAGE Care that has trained, at this point, more than 60,000 care providers across the country. So it's that combination of creating specified programs and really the kind of work we need to do to open up all programs to make them welcoming for every older adult, including LGBT folks.
Absolutely. And Joe, could you talk to me about some of the initiatives that NLC is implementing to prioritize the needs of this age group in particular?
Yeah, you know, cities, as it was mentioned in the previous panel, we are the laboratories for innovation and housing. For us in the National League of Cities, representing over 200 million Americans in this country, housing is a critical issue for us in cities to ensure that we have affordable housing opportunities for those who are aging in place. You know, in Los Angeles, it was mentioned that we have a homeless problem. We just opened a bridge home, which is an emergency temporary shelter in Watts in my district. And nearly half of the residents there are seniors. I met Laverne Green. Laverne Green, who we highlighted not too long ago when Mayor Pete Buttigieg visited our bridge home site. She shared with us that she was once a nurse. She cared for others. That was her career. A nasty divorce ended up forced her to live in her car for the last year and a half, and now she has found this bridge home site is now looking for a new job. I think about my 99-year-old grandmother who will turn 100 this year, my Nonna Serena. thank God that she has my mom and my aunts and my uncle, that she's able to rotate and have a place to stay and be around her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, and her great-great-grandchildren. Wow. But my nonna is blessed. There are others that at her age and who don't have a place to go. As an LAPD officer, I can tell you for 15 years working the streets, I've seen individuals who, because they weren't able to afford rent, afford housing, died on a sidewalk. So as National League of Cities and as a president in 2020, I'll be focusing on elevating the discussion of housing and homelessness for all generations, particularly our senior communities.
Absolutely. Karen, you also served as the mayor of Gary, Indiana. You know, I'd love to hear, what you did in that community to improve the intergenerational bonds there. And, just talk to us a little bit about Gary. I've never been there. I know it from the musical, The Music Man, I believe. Yes.
Gary, Indiana, that's right.
But, yeah, talk to us about that, because I believe it's a bit of a smaller town.
It is.
And
We
such.
have about 80,000 people. Still the steel capital of the Midwest, if not the U.S., because U.S. Steel's flagship plant is there. One of the things that we understood was the importance of having seniors feel like their wisdom, their experience was valued. And so we did a couple of things. The first is we created a senior summit. And we did it for 3 years and just brought them together, not just to talk about healthcare, but a lot of the conversation was about healthcare, but it also encouraged them to be civically engaged. And so we talked about volunteerism and how we needed their input and their help. In addition to that, we learned about their gifts and talents. And so it allowed them to be mentors. And so often we think about mentoring with young people, 18 and younger. But, all of us at some point in our lives, even up until the point that we become 80 or 90, can use a mentor around certain subject matters. So if there's a new business owner in the community, as an example, we were able to pair seniors who had run businesses successfully or who had lost businesses, because that's experience as well. To talk to them and say, hey, you know what? These are some of the pitfalls. These are some of the ways that you can make your experience easier. We were also able to do that around our urban gardening, urban farming work, to get young people and older people involved with gardening, with raising goats, things like that. Now, the mayor goes to a lot of those things. I didn't go to the goat exhibit, but I went to the urban gardening part. But so those are some of the things, because it allows our young people to begin to value our seniors, and then it allows our seniors to understand that you are far from out of the game.
Absolutely. I hear that goat yoga is now very popular.
Well, you can tell me about it.
I'll tell you all about it.
Karen, if I can, Karen reminds me when we're planning as city leaders, county leaders on infrastructure and green infrastructure. Not too long ago in my district, we actually had a huge community celebration, adding our first skate park in a community that I represent, Harbor City. And it was a youth-led initiative. But an older lady came up to me, God bless her soul. She goes, this is great for the kids, but when are you putting in my community garden? And I go, yes, ma'am, it's coming, right? So as we plan and lead, we have the more inclusive of all generations.
One group that I'd really like to pick your brains about are veterans. It seems that, and especially in terms of veterans and homelessness, especially veterans in this age group, it seems to be a big issue for that particular group. Are your organizations doing a lot to work with veterans in particular, and veterans who are getting older and maybe don't have access to, resources that some other Americans might have?
So yes, and actually as you're talking, it was like great partnerships here that I'm thinking about to do between the counties and the cities, and programs that the veterans can get involved in terms of our foster grandparent programs that counties run through, again, our Office on Aging or our senior companions, because again, you have populations that are isolated and don't have anybody else, they don't have family. That again, those individuals can be trained and then go to be the companion for others. And so veterans definitely is a group that we are looking at and trying to figure out how do we mesh those programs to include them as well. And then the other population is our aging population of those that are in our jails and prisons. So again, if you just think of the number of individuals that will be reaching that age group, we have a lot, if not all, of our services that we provide both within the counties and the cities to that population.
You know, that is an excellent example, and that's one of the things that we do at the Chicago Urban League. We have a focus on housing, but we also understand that, as a number of folks have talked about, sometimes you just don't have the information. And being a community-based organization and being right in the community, we are able to connect veterans to the housing needs that they have, to the healthcare needs that they have. And so while there are a lot of opportunities, they don't always know about them.
And we have at SAGE, actually, we have a program called SAGE Vets, and one of the things that we see is that, unfortunately, because of discrimination against LGBT people in the military historically, we have many LGBT folks who have served in the military but are not accessing desperately needed veterans benefits. I mean, this is one of the great things, is that we do have a good system of veterans health and veterans benefits. And so we do a lot of work to try to connect people to their benefits and also really allow our veterans who come from our communities to reclaim that sense of pride from their service that unfortunately was denied for them for a long time.
I just want to let our audience know in about a minute or so we'll have time for about 5 minutes of Q&A, so think of those questions if you have any in particular, and we will get to you then. Another group I would like to talk about is women, and how women are dealing with the idea of issues like retirement and planning for this next stage in their life. How is maybe it different for women than it is for men? And I'll pose it to the whole group.
Well, one of the ways it's different is that women still tend to live a lot longer, particularly in the African American community. Right. And so you have women who are widows or who may have never married, who are trying to navigate what they're going to do. Housing isn't getting any cheaper. They don't always have the option of living with their children or with other people. And so to the extent that assisted living and the housing opportunities that Joe talked about, those become extremely important. And that's how cities and counties and organizations can really come together around them with, with housing opportunities, but also with socialization opportunities. And so that's one of the ways.
And as women, we tend to be going into the role as caregiver. And so again, my initiative was also brought on because of a personal experience that I became a caregiver for both of my parents. My daddy has stage 4 lymphoma and many heart problems, and my mama has Alzheimer's. And so it happened, you are taking care of them, but you don't think of being their caregiver, and all of a sudden it's there. And again, as I'm trying to think of, I'm right now, how old am I? I'm almost 58. So, but again, you're starting to think about those things, about your retirement, about your grandkids, about your job, your living conditions. And all of a sudden, you're forced into this role as caregiver, and it's how do you balance all of this? And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to be able to help women
ease into those roles or ease into that phase in their life, but also to help them and help the caregiver stay healthy and their quality of life stay up, because it is a huge challenge. And again, I watched it from the outside of being involved with our Office on Aging for many years and listening to the caregiver stories, that you do not know what it's like until you are in that situation. And I'm honored and blessed that I have the opportunity to do that. But again, it does create many challenges for us.
Aside, if I may add, aside from my mom, the most, one of my mentors is my nonna, my grandmother's, be 100 this year. Again, I'm really excited about that. But she cared for me as a kid growing up, and my mom and dad would drop me off in the summer, and I'll never forget when we would walk to the neighborhood deli, and then we would walk to Anderson Senior Center, where we would play bingo together. I was 5 years old. This was 40 years ago, Karen. And I still remember that to this day. We would play bingo, we would go on bus trips, and those are the types of programming that we still need to lead and embrace and fund. In Los Angeles, we have a city-county partnership, a Purposeful Living Los Angeles initiative. It's a 5-year plan that focuses on empowerment, engagement, workforce development, infrastructure, housing. These are the, we are focused on providing those types of resources for women. In Los Angeles, we've also experienced that we have a large number of homeless women who are living in encampments in our sidewalks, who are struggling with domestic violence and sex trafficking. And we, when we talk about the importance of solving homelessness and housing affordability, we cannot ignore the fact that a lot of women are in that space and are struggling with the issues of housing instability.
But you're also seeing grandparents take on the role of parenting their grandchildren. Oh, absolutely. And it is a increasing number every single year. Sure. And so again, whatever the circumstances are, behind that, you then are, like through our Office on Aging every year, we just get this influx of calls of needing help for whether it be their being able to take care of themselves, because now their dollars are going towards raising their grandkids. But again, you're going to see that continually increase because of, again, the rising age group.
Right. So I lied. I think we only have time for maybe one question or maybe two questions. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I think we have a couple in the front here. We'll come around with a mic.
Thanks for doing this. Bill Cunningham, Create Investment Research. So in your roles at the National League of Cities and the counties and also Chicago Urban League, I'm interested in what you think about opportunity zones, the Opportunity Zones program out of this administration.
So I would be the first to indicate that I think that opportunity zones were one of the best things to come out of the tax bill. And I wasn't a fan of the bill. The thing is to be prepared, and this is from the city perspective, to take advantage of that so that you won't have investors who will just come in and cherry pick, if you will. They'll come in and really partner with local folks to create meaningful opportunities, because the whole idea is not to create an opportunity solely for the investor, but it's also to create growth, to create more wealth in communities. And so at the Urban League, we are focused on that opportunity, if you will, in that we are saying we can partner you with good ideas that are in the opportunity zone that will be meaningful for you as an investor, but also meaningful for you as a community. The mayors have done the same thing through their prospectus because they understand sort of the positive aspect and the perils of it.
The National League of Cities Community Economic Development Committee has embraced opportunity zones with some of those concerns as well that Karen alluded to. I can tell you in my district in the city of Los Angeles, I was one of the first projects that was financed through an opportunity zone that is focused on housing, and the second one is coming in my district. But when we talk about planning and future planning, and even talking about inclusionary zones focused on affordable housing, we as city leaders, county leaders, should put an inclusionary zone for senior housing and demand developers who are bringing housing into our respective cities to put a set aside a certain percentage for senior housing. I can tell you again through personal experience that my parents, my dad's 74 and my mom's 68, they were looking at a local retirement home, Little Sisters of the Poor in my hometown, and there's a 20-year wait to get into that site.
Yeah.
So are we prepared as city leaders to address that issue and of senior housing and demand more senior housing being built in our cities, towns, and villages throughout the country?
Well, I think that's about all the time we have, but thank you so much for this conversation. I learned so much, and I'm sure the audience did as well. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists and to Julia. We hope you found the onstage conversations inspiring and of consequence. I know I found a lot of humor in them as well. Aging is inevitable, so why not plan ahead? We encourage everyone to keep the conversation going on social media using the hashtag #TheHillMayors. On behalf of The Hill and our underwriter AARP, we'd like to thank all those of you in the room for joining us today. If you missed any portion of today's discussion, the full event video will be available on thehill.com shortly. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again for another one of our events. Enjoy.